Good afternoon everyone, and thank you for attending today's Transitional Committee meeting of our City Committee. My name is Dawn Dale and I'll be chairing this meeting today. If officers would like to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, I'm Elise Senior Wadsworth. I'm Head of Business Strategy, but I'm currently working in the coordinating team supporting delivery of the one-year plan.
Thank you.
Hello all, I'm Paul Taylor, I'm the Head of Customer Services.
Thank you. And for benefits of getting through the meeting, once elected members would like to speak, if you could introduce yourselves at that point, that would be great. Thank you. Rachel, would you like to go through housekeeping, please?
Thank you, Chair. Housekeeping. To help keep everyone safe, please maintain social distancing at all times. Please wear a face covering at all times within the venue unless you have an exemption. It can be removed once seated, but you may wish to leave it on. Hand sanitizer will be available for you to use. Please remain seated during the meeting and do not congregate around exits and entrances. Follow any signage which is provided, such as one-way systems, to help keep you safe. If you have any concerns or are unsure, please ask a member of staff. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, please take instruction from staff and stewards. The assembly point is at Tudor Square. Please can I request everyone to switch mobile devices to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. The meeting today will be webcast and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. While ever the meeting is open to the public, photography, video and sound recording of the proceedings is permitted. However, the Chair has discretion to withdraw or suspend this permission, for example, if the recording is disrupting the conduct of the meeting or is being undertaken in a manner which could capture personal information, or in the event that a member of the public participating in a meeting objects to being recorded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do. We have apologies from Councillor Clement Jones and Councillor Growcut, and we have a substitute member as Councillor Tim Huggan. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any exclusions of public or press? I don't believe there are. Thank you. Any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Looking at the minutes of the previous meeting on page 9 to page 14, I trust that everyone may have had time to look at these. Do anyone have any issues arising or any comments on those minutes? So can we declare that they are true record? Thank you. Do we have any public questions or petitions? No. Thank you. Okay. At this point in the agenda, we will be looking at item number 7, which is customer service standards and expectations. As a committee, we are being asked to use our knowledge and experience to describe the future experience of a customer, what their ambitions are for customers, so that the council officers deliver improvements that take steps towards an ambitious commitment to customers and help us to identify any gaps in knowledge and understanding. And I'd now like to hand over to Elise, who would like to take us through this part of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We've prepared some session notes to help form our discussion, which build on the report that was circulated ahead of today's meeting. We understand that our current position in terms of our offer to our customers is, as you have raised with us, below the standard that we would like to achieve. And what we'd like to do with your support and guidance is work out how we can shape and prioritise our efforts so that we have the maximum impact on the customers that use our services the most and work out to our more universal customers. So if I could ask for the next slide to be brought up. Just a little bit of background to this. My profession, if you like, is organisational change and change delivery. So this is quite a common tool that we use when we are trying to set our vision, when we're trying to set out what the ambition is, especially useful in a complex or challenging change agenda. Called postcards from the future, and they are exactly as they would sound. It's where we take the current experience of, in this case, our customers, but it can be anyone, and we flip that, and usually through working with them directly or with yourselves as their representatives and advocates, we describe what their future experience should be. So for those that have had a negative experience or have waited too long, not had satisfaction, we can work with them and through you to describe what actually, if they were to tell us what good looks like, what would that feel like? What is the flip side of their experience? What we'd like to do with you is to use your experience and knowledge to pull together a series of postcards from the future that represent a cross-cutting sample of the customers that you come into contact and that we know through experience of Paul's team, through complaints, for example, have had less than satisfactory experience when dealing with the council. Before I move on to the next sections, I'd like to kind of hand back to you, Chair, to have a discussion about that as a process.
Thank you. I'd like to open the floor to members for any questions for Elise, if it's clear about what it is we're being asked to do. So does anyone have any questions with regards to that slide and what the expectations for us are? Because I think some people are looking a little bit confused. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, we can give you lots of ideas and suggestions about how you should do the service. It's very easy. Do what Amazon do. Dead easy. But I am jesting slightly. But there's so much technology out there. There's hardly anyone without a mobile anymore. There's lots of ways we cannot have our tenants waiting at home for a repair unnecessarily. And there are lots of other ways where people can report services and not have to hang on the phone forever in a day. But if somebody does ring up, there's also systems and techniques that can get them through to the appropriate person quite quickly and efficiently. And we need to be using all these techniques and all these methods so that the fourth largest city in the country can say it's got the best customer service in the country, and it certainly can't at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Ross.
Thank you. As I understand it, we're almost being formed like a local government association peer review, which has been there, and I've been on a number of peer reviews in other authorities myself. Attended the workshop along with colleagues here, and there were a few things that were glaringly obvious that we could do. You know, one was not so much thinking about how we could handle this volume of calls, but thinking about how we can reduce the volume of calls, so you don't have to take on extra staff, etc. And as Penny's pointed out, we were mightily surprised as members when we found out you couldn't log housing repairs online. Why not in this day and age? We, as councillors, get our constituents coming to us when basically they don't come to us first off, they come to us when they're end of the tether and frustrated. And we've all had casework where I've been trying, like the example up there, 4 hours and not get a reply and things. Or when I've got a reply, it's not been satisfactory. Or one that's very avoidable, I rang up to find out why they hadn't come. So if we tell people we're not going to come, it saves those number of phone calls, and you have somebody who won't be happy, but at least they're in a position of knowing what's happening rather than having to ring up day after day and say, you were supposed to, I'm thinking of the casework last week, you were supposed to be here to fix my front door on the 21st, and you're not here yet, and I can't get through, can you get through? And it was just that, the door hadn't arrived, so we weren't ready to go out. Well, tell the customer. Yeah, and it's not rocket science. And the other thing that we suggested, and it's in the notes from the workshop, was when large volume mailings are sent out that are quite likely to generate calls, phase them. Don't send 2,000 to land on one day, so you're likely to get, even if you're going to get 10% of the people, your 200 phone calls. Face them over a couple of days. It's not rocket science, you know. Look at reducing the number of calls rather than how do we deal with this volume of calls. Rant over.
Thank you. I think you're just representing your constituents really, so much appreciated there. Councillor Hogan.
Yeah, one of the things I'm looking at, because I speak to a lot of residents, particularly in our housing stock, houses in Crooks recently, and one of the things that was quite noticeable when you speak to them on the doorstep is a lot of them don't have a fixed line broadband at all. And so the sort of systems we need to go down along is, which would be a lot better, would be somewhere where you could book via internet that would be easily on your phone, or via a voice-activated system, which I'd go down the line of as well, so that to book a system where there would be you could book a time slot when they bring you back, basically, because then people aren't waiting around all day, that sort of thing. That can be run for emergency calls. I mean, I'd slightly, you know, there's been too much of the mantra of the one-stop shop with one number just for everything on the council, and the big issue with that is that somebody asking about various tickets for an event coming up and having quite a lot of taking 20 minutes of time, somebody who has a really urgent housing repair is behind them in the queue, and that's part of the issue. So I would separate those off. I'm keen on, for most things, a one-stop number, but I think for things like housing repairs, that sort of thing, just needs to be a separate number, and we have to look at a voice-activated booking system or something that can be done easily by somebody on a mobile phone, because the tenants most in need will not have a fixed line broadband, and that is something that we need to look at having, that they can easily book through their phone, either by the internet or by a voice-activated system, where then they get a time slot, they're going to be called back, because that is the crucial thing, rather than waiting in and round all day, potentially to try and get through, or waiting for hours, because that's something that's a regular occurrence I get talked to about, or whether so that they know there's a time they can call back. Obviously, there has to be for the real emergencies that they can say ASAP, so we have a system for that. But I think it's the sort of system that we would have would be so that people can book by voice or through the mobile internet. That's the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor Kate MacDonald. I'm the exec member for Finance and Resources. I think at the moment, I'm not sure whether people are sort of interpreting this ask about postcards from the future in the context of the current sort of difficulties we're having around a particular part of the service. This recommendation from the LGA review was actually for the whole council, not just for this service. And to be honest, I've said the first time I came to this committee that the contact centre is the window to the council. It isn't the whole council. So I can understand why everybody's frustrated at one part of it, but I think we just need to sort of stand back a bit and try to sort of think about some basic stuff, like people should be able to, to get in touch with the council relatively straightforward in the way that they choose to do. Those sorts of things for me. I haven't been involved in discussing this particular mechanism, but I think it's just to try and get us to stand back a bit and to come up with some suggestions for how the whole council works together. Because, I mean, I've been trying to get in touch with a particular department myself with a lot of frustration, and it wasn't the customer services, the contact centre at all. So there are some wider issues, I think, for citizens trying to get in touch with the council that we might want to think about, and then look at what we have to do in order to be able to deliver those standards across the whole council. I think that's what's intended, but I can appreciate everybody's really, particularly if you've been involved in sort of the workshops, and I mean I've been very close to it as well for a while, and we do have to sort stuff, but we also have to understand that you can't just sort one bit of it. We have to think a bit wider than that. So I'm trying to be helpful in terms of putting this ask in context, and perhaps asking people to sort of stand back a bit and come up with some general principles that might inform this work for the whole council. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take the chair for a minute. I think we are going in the right direction, because we have discussed lots of different areas within the council. But for the citizens of Sheffield, the one number that they call, generally the 273457, is their way into whether it's blue badges or whatever services it might be, where the hold up is. And it has become quite evident that there is one service in particular which is creating a bit of an issue for all of the, it's having a knock-on effect on other services with regards to waiting times for customers. I understand, and most of our bags are filled with one area, but there are other areas with regards to what we need to be looking at, and I completely agree with that. I think if I was to write a postcard from the future, I've actually spoken to Paul via email about this, I've got a particular piece of casework that I picked up today, where I've got a constituent who is terminally ill and end-of-life care, who's been trying to get in touch with revenues and benefits to sort out her council tax. She's been unable to do so and been on waiting time for at least an hour and a half at a time. Her advocate then went into the front door at First Point at Howden House and was turned away. When he knew he wouldn't be able to discuss anything, but he asked if there was an alternative way in which she could be dealt with, and was turned away. I've had to follow that up, because this lady does not need to be spending this valuable part of her life sat in a queue waiting to get through. So my future postcard would be to say that I could get through to revenues and benefits within 15 minutes and get my case resolved. Because what we do know is that when they do get through, the staff are brilliant and they deal with things really efficiently and really effectively, and the outcome at the end of that would be really positive. So that would just be one case, which is not necessarily about repairs or housing, but it is the knock-on effect of that. So that would be my postcard from the future. And is that the sort of thing you're looking for? So I'm sure we could all give examples of where people have spoken to us and what we would want the outcome to be.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors, for your comments. Kate, thank you. That is kind of what we were trying to sort of look at here. And if it's helpful just to share a little bit of context where this sits in some of the other work that we're dealing with. So, as the LGA peer review absolutely highlighted, there's a lot to go at here. And we've got to start where we know that we'll have the greatest impact, so that our customers who use most of our services or use our services most frequently needs to be where we start. And in taking their current experience, so the experience of that you've just shared with us, Councillor Dale, is exactly the kind of thing that we need to reshape, so that we can, from our customers' experience point of view, so Paul will have been here before and spoken about data and performance and things like that, but what we want to do as part of this is make sure that we capture customers' experience in here, so that we can with confidence describe that when we explore the technology, the callback, the different kinds of solutions that absolutely we are looking at, that we can reflect back and is that postcard the experience of our customers now once we've gone through that change journey. The report that was circulated prior to today's meeting talks about the use of standards quite in twofold. One, in that we think it's right to make a statement to our customers about what they can expect. So one of the things that's really important about whether it's a postcard from the future or a customer charter is that none of us, or very few of us, or our customers expect miracles, but we want to know what we can expect. And part of that will be making commitments. So the 15 minutes is, a reasonable, it's not 3 minutes, that kind of thing. So having standards that set what our customers can expect from us, and then in turn that we can be held to account that we've not met those standards, and clear channels to raise those kind of concerns. Because we know that, for however many contact you, there are very many who don't, who are probably experiencing the same challenges. So we need to assume that they are the tip of an iceberg rather than exceptions.
Yeah, just to add, I think we've been very driven by sort of numerical targets up to now. The contact centre works to an 85% key performance indicator, which means that we should answer 85% of all calls. We need to be moving more into a qualitative space. Now, that doesn't mean, you know, this is, as you say, Councillor Dale, people wait for ages and then they get a really good service when they get answered. But it's also about making sure that we deal with people's issues in one go. You know, because that's the other danger with the queues, is that people try and go quickly. People don't get the full experience that we want to get in terms of solving their problem, and then they need to call us back again and they're back in the queue. So, you know, it's that whole thing about managing failure demand. I mean, again, when we speak about repairs and maintenance, that's one of the key issues, is that we get sometimes 30-35% of calls are failure demand. They're the people who haven't turned, you know, where people haven't turned up to do a job or whatever. So we've got people queuing up for that. So it's trying to move to a realistic quality indicator. And some of that is about how long people are waiting. And it's also about making sure that we try and, you know, somebody mentioned one-stop shops, but we do need to try and get to a point where people's queries are dealt with there and then, however long that takes. But the answer, I think, is about clearing the way for the people who really do need to call us. So again, when we're talking about the sort of technological improvements, and we're working on a lot of those and we can do those, and people say, well, that's not going to work for everybody. But I think the point is, if the people who can use technology are able to use that technology with confidence, that clears the queues a bit for the people who can't. They can get through to us more easily, and often they're people with a lot of other challenges going on as well.
Councillor Baker.
Okay, I think, one, we didn't really understand what you wanted, let's be honest. But I do think, for example, that Councillor Huggan made a very good suggestion, and that's have a designated repairs line. That will probably get rid of rather a large percentage of your phone calls off the other line quite quickly and improve the service for the people who don't need repairs without much work. But then when you've got your designated repair line, you've got to make sure that the answers, how can I put it, make sure that they get an answer and a follow-up. I mean, it's all right saying, yes, we'll send a repairman out tomorrow, and we've said it already, the repairman doesn't come. And then nobody contacts this individual who's waiting, and they wait again, so they get back on the phone, nobody's been. That call to say, I'm sorry, we aren't going to do it today, does two good things. It tells an individual that they matter, and we're taking their repair very seriously, and it also allows you to keep your switchboard free, so-called. It really gives you a quality response. Going forward, I know you've got ideas and various things that we've already suggested regarding the way you use the repair service and record them there, but we've all got casework. I've got a lady who rang me yesterday who is really struggling, and she's been at it for 18 months. Do you know, that ain't on. She's not silly. She's not someone who needs help and support normally. Quite capable of taking her for herself, but she can't get the answers she needs. That can't happen. We need to get everything in place so that when the phone goes down on an individual inquiry, that is going to be dealt with. And that'll make a big difference going forward. But I do think the situation we're in at the moment, a designated repair line would probably help quite considerably, as Councillor Huggan said.
I think it's really a question of who's answering those calls. So in effect, if we had a dedicated repairs line, if you had a team, you still have the same resources who are dealing with those calls, then you're still going to have some of the similar challenges. We can make it smoother. I mean, we're currently about to pilot natural language. So if we get to a situation where instead of people having to go press 1, press 4, press 3, people can just, you know, tell us in a few words what you're calling about. I'm calling to order a repair. Then people go straight through. So in effect, they could still use the golden number, but we can make that a bit smoother. But at the end of the day, regardless of what number people are ringing, we need to make sure we've got the resources to deal with it, and to take out those calls that shouldn't be coming through, so that the people who, you know, who need to order a new repair can get through sharpish.
If I could just, sorry Paul, if I could just add to that, and apologies, it's the first time I've been with you for one of these conversations, so if you've covered this already, I apologise. One of the things that is very clear to me, having joined this, Paul's obviously been working in this area for some time, is that Paul and his team can't solve this problem. So this experience only improves when we connect the nose and the tail. So when the operative who goes out to make that repair, all the way through repairs and maintenance, all the way through customer service, to the person who answers the call, only when that flows and works properly will the experience that you and we want for our customers be achieved. And one of the mechanisms of doing that is to use some standards frameworks so that we all work towards a common outcome, so that whether you are in revenues and benefits, customer services, it doesn't matter, that we're working towards that common goal in terms of improved experience for our customers. And that has got to be the thing that feels different, I think, in terms of our work moving forward, that we're inclusive of everybody who can affect that change for our customers. As Councillor MacDonald says, you know, the call centre, and indeed anybody who answers the phone on behalf of the council, they are the window, they are the shop front of the council, and we owe it to them to provide a better end-to-end service so they can, you know, get that first-time service fulfilment for our customers.
Councillor Gilligan.
Hello, yeah, I'm Councillor Christine Gilligan, and I agree with what you're saying, and I think it fits in nicely with my question, which is about data management, I guess, because a lot of the calls I get too are, well, nothing's happened, what's going on? And it's, are you going to be able to get some continuous data management? So you take a call in the call centre, perhaps it goes to housing repairs, they can't do it straight away. Is it going on a database, and will this database then be able to alert the relevant people that this has not yet been sorted? Because that seems to me as well something that you need to start to build in, because as you say, you've got to do it end to end, and all the different teams have to speak to each other.
There's two aspects to that. Thank you. It's a really, really important question. One is how we manage our contacts. So when people contact the council, all those people who need to see that information need to see that information, so that if they are then picking up an aspect of that process or call, that they can see what's been said previously, so that that feels like a continuous experience for our customers and not a disjointed baton passing, which we know is what can happen all too often. The second part of that, which is much harder, I have to say, is how we connect our core council systems. So we hold, as an organisation, a staggering degree of very sensitive information about our customers across housing, social care, these areas. And actually we need better connectivity at that level, so that actually customers have to make fewer calls, because proactively our teams can spot a need before a customer's identified that for themselves. Now that's the much harder part, and something that is probably a 2 to 3 year journey. But the first part of that, the contact management, and that was part of the feedback from the peer review, was that actually you need to have a clearer telephony system that offers a greater visibility and transparency.
So one of the things we're exploring is a customer portal. So in effect, people are able to sort of set up an account with the council and can use that to be able to track what's happening. So somebody orders a repair, they haven't heard anything in you know, somebody hasn't turned up or whatever, or it's been rearranged, they can go onto that portal and see what's happening. Or again, with revenues and benefits, somebody rings up, says, I've had a change in my pension, can you amend it? that then go, because that's another one where people ring back and go, well, I've rung and I don't think anything's happened. So they can actually track what's happening and see what's going on. We're exploring whether we could afford to do a portal, and one of the useful things from the LGA peer review is there's some small grant funding that they're saying potentially is available, and we've gone back to them and it's asked me for something that we can't actually afford, and we've gone back and gone, what about if it was something we could partially afford, we can't actually afford all of? And they've said, yeah, we're amenable to that. So one option may be to try and speed forward the idea of that customer portal. It doesn't, to be honest, it doesn't necessarily, people may still be waiting too long for a repair to be done or too long for something to be processed, but at least they'll have some means of being able to track that.
A bit like when you're having a parcel delivered.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. Just pulling this away from the contact centre and repairs, and looking at the future postcards and other experiences that people are having, there is sometimes an issue, I think, around communication and the amount of handover of work, of casework. So say, for instance, somebody's going to be on long-term sick. What happens to their caseload when they're off? This week alone, I've had a couple of people call me trying to chase things up because the person they're trying to get hold of that works for the council, they can't get hold of, but no one's been in touch with them to say, well, this person's not here at the moment and this person's the one that's going to be covering and picking that work up. So we're looking at a 6-month gap here where, so somebody's had a letter, a confirmation letter to say, yes, we've got your information, and then there's a 6-month gap and they've still not heard anything. So it's and I think communication is key, isn't it, when dealing with good customer service and handovers. And I think, I just thought, we did when we were having our workshop before, one of the things that we did discuss was around our letters when they go out. And I know previously it had been agreed that no letters would hit a doormat on a Saturday morning, then leaving people to worry over a weekend and not being able to get hold of anyone. Letters should be posted, and I think we post second class, don't we? So stuff shouldn't go out later than a Wednesday because we know it's not going to hit. You don't want them all hitting on a Friday and everybody panicking, do we, over the weekend? So there's things like that as well. And I think for anyone just looking at here, it's regular updates, follow-up, handover, and realistic timescales for people. So citizens of Sheffield, like us, don't expect miracles, but what we do expect is to be given a reasonable timescale of work. So if something, you know, if somebody is supporting you, then we need to keep people regularly up to date. You know, and I know Councillor Gilligan had mentioned a lot of her casework as well, is also that they don't really get a reference when, you know, that we've got it, we've got your stuff, thank you, here's your reference number, and give us 10 working days or 6 weeks or whatever it is to look into it, and we'll get back in touch with you. So when it comes to standards, I think there's something in there around communication and feedback that people should be regularly kept in the loop around where their cases are, because they shouldn't have to come looking, or they shouldn't have to ring up regularly to try and find out what's happening. But mindful of that, we are mindful of capacity as well. So, and like Councillor MacDonald said, this is vast. You know, we haven't even thought about visitors to the city and what their experience. We've not really had that conversation, you know, around when it comes to our leisure, what customer service facilities are people receiving when they come in. So, are we kind of going around the right route for you? And do you want us to move on, or I'm happy for you to take a lead on this and guide us?
Thank you, Councillor Dale. So, if I can share an example of that isn't about the call centre and isn't about that universal sort of customer contact point. So prior to being in this role, I worked in people services and supported our families and young people with special educational needs. And the work that we did in that area identified some really simple principles that I think we should adopt much more widely than in that area. Simple things. If the answer isn't going to be positive, if it's not what that customer is going to want to hear, they probably shouldn't read it in a letter. You know, we should pick up the phone, we should have a conversation, and then the letter confirms that potentially negative or less positive outcome. We should, especially where customers, if you think about planning, but send as a 20-week process, we should help them keep track of that process. So as you said, we should proactively say, this is the stage in the process you're at, this is what we've done already, this is what we'll do next. Because we know we all have busy lives and actually people aren't sitting around. We need to do the thinking for people. So I think there is an opportunity to look at where we have already got some learning in other parts of the council and take that into this piece about standards so that we don't reinvent the wheel, because actually, you know, we invested heavily in getting to that point by working with our families. So thank you. I think that was really helpful. Could I ask for the next slide to be put up? Your point, Chair, about we haven't even spoken about visitors to the city. As I have done, because I am a terminal Googler, I've looked at dozens and dozens of council websites to look at who do they consider their customers to be, who actually are our customers. And that's a really important question when we're thinking about setting standards, because who are we setting them for? And depending on the organisation you read, and this is not necessarily just about local authorities, this can be other public sector organisations as well. It can be as broad as anyone who visits, works in, lives, uses our city, you know, however often, or it can be those that use our services particularly frequently or have got a particularly heavy demand on that service. I think your point about our resources is a really important one. There is probably a 3-year programme of work here, and we can't do it all at once. So we have to work out where do we start to make the biggest impact, and you've all made really helpful suggestions about where people who contact you would see those benefits. But I wanted to ask whether what you think, how you feel about us being really targeted in this at this point in time, because we could approach this big scale, all of our customers. My view is that would dilute our impact at this stage, and that doesn't feel like it's the right thing to do for the customers who are most dependent on it, but I welcome your views on that.
I'll open it up. Do any members have a view on whether we think this should be done at a really broad brush across the whole of the organisation, or do we feel that we should have a plan for 3 years to get to that end result, but throughout that journey look for targeted at specific areas where we can make more change? Anyone? Councillor MacDonald.
Just to kick us off, there's some things that are going to be universal, and that's the way we talk to people and the way we treat people with respect. There are other things that are going to be a bit more difficult, particularly some of the stuff we've just talked about. So I think that we need to come up with some, this is my suggestion, or my view rather, some generic stuff, but then look at how it might apply differently, or how we might have to implement that in a different way. And it would be more complex in terms of how it would apply in different situations. So I don't think we should treat people differently. I think we should treat everybody well. But we may need to the implications of that may mean that we have to do it in a different way, or it's more complicated to do. I don't know if that helps, but that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lodge.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we get the complaints that come through because of the service users, and yet we want to make it inclusive and available and accessible. But I think what we really need to do, and I think is what you were indicating there, the aspiration is, yes, you know, this is where we want to be, but we've got to be realistic and set realistic targets. And I think once we're confident that we're dealing with those service users and we are, you know, responding to those issues, then let's have a look and go through. But it's almost as if we go too broad a brush to start with. We're just creating the problem. We're not going to deal with the problem. We need to deal with those problems here and now, and then work onto that. But it's interesting as you look at it, because yeah, you know, you want to make it there for everybody if anybody needs to get into it for whatever reason. But I think we just need to be a bit focused a little more on the specifics now. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think what we're probably getting at is having a set of overarching principles about how people are treated throughout the whole of our service, but then actually looking at that phased approach to the targeted work, so that by the end of the 3 years we've got the right standard across the board. Would everybody agree with that or disagree? Councillor Ross?
No, not disagreeing, but I'm just thinking about you mentioned phasing it in, because we did discuss at the workshop, callback was recommended by the peer review, except we know we haven't got the capacity to cope with that, so you just build in more frustrations for customers when they don't get the call back. We talked about the idea of extending some capacity by weekend working, but with overtime, but that wasn't popular amongst the people there. But yes, I agree with the overarching principles, and don't promise things that we can't deliver, because that just exacerbates the frustration and gives us as a council reputational risk.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think really helpful comments. And I think your point, Councillor Ross, about expectations is well made. Our customers are really reasonable. Our customers understand that as an organisation we don't have the resources that we perhaps used to have, and that things might not be quick fix. So our customers are, in my experience, very reasonable. But if we are going to set an expectation, then we have to be confident that that's an expectation that we can meet. Could I ask for the next slide, please? So one of the things that we need to be really mindful of, and there is some qualitative information to suggest that those that need perhaps use adaptive technology, or perhaps need to use an advocate to contact our services, have had a tougher time during the pandemic than we would like. So one of the things that I consider to be really important, and our own current accessibility statement that's on our website, is not, I think, what any of us would want. So everything that we are doing around technology needs to ensure that we design accessible services. So accessible for those that perhaps use adaptive technology, those that perhaps are digitally excluded, or choose not to be digitally included, which is a different thing, and those that for other reasons might need to use other mechanisms to contact our services. And I think it's important that this is enshrined in our standards, so that we make sure that as we develop new systems or new processes, that we use these as our backbone to make sure that we are inclusive to all of our customers.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that? No? Would you like to carry on?
Final slide, I think it is. So, the next steps, and in the report that was circulated prior to today's meeting, I put in a table of some of the industry standard frameworks that exist. The main one is probably the Cabinet Office's Customer Excellent. That's probably the main one, but there are others out there. So with your support, we'd like to explore which of those standards might serve us in the best strength moving forward. We would need to explore the administrative costs and implications of those a bit further. We would like to collate some postcards from the future with your help. Paul and his team are also going to use the complaints channels to contact some of our customers who we know would be happy to help us to describe a better future. We would like to go away and do the Cabinet Office standard has got a self-assessment tool, which is free. And with your support, Paul and I would like to use the findings of the LGA peer review and all of the other information and data we have to put ourselves through that self-assessment and feed that back to you, ideally at the next meeting in March although I haven't looked at it yet, so I don't know how achievable that is, but hopefully it's free, so I suspect it's going to be fairly desktop. And finally, anything else? So between now and when you all next meet in March, is there anything else that you would want under the banner of standards? Is there anything else that you would expect us to be working on or thinking about, bearing in mind that the output of the workshop will take forward separately to this particular piece on standards?
Thank you, Elise. I think I'm just going to ask members, is there anything else that we'd want to hear before? And I'm glad you said March, because I was just about to ask how long you were expecting this to take. But now you've said March and I've written it down. That's kind of a deadline. Because we have, as a committee, we have been tasked also to work with you on this piece of work. So has anybody got anything else they'd like to ask or anything they'd like to add? Thank you, Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's something that we have to create ourselves, or, you know, work through ourselves, rather than something, I mean collectively, I don't mean particularly just this committee, but so rather than having a bolt-on. But it would be interesting to, if we've got examples of councils that do it well, that's what I would find interesting. It's not just to have a book of them really, but you must know that there are councils that have got good reputations for getting this stuff right. So it would be interesting just to see what theirs were. I don't know if anybody else agrees with me, but that's just another suggestion from me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, but what I would like to ask Elise and Paul is, I know we've met today and you've got some asks, but would you want some members to work with you and have regular, so is there anyone in the room that would be interested in having more contact with Elise and Paul to push this? I definitely will. I'm definitely interested in this, and Councillor Gilligan, anyone, so, and Councillor Naz. So count us in. And what we will be asking is, we will be asking our colleagues for information to feed in as well. So maybe some of those future postcards that we can feed in some expectations across the groups really as well. That Councillor Ross and then Councillor.
Just to add that I found the workshop we did an hour and a half or whenever it was early this week very useful and informative and moved things along, and the briefing note that's been produced for this, you know, encapsulates a lot of the thoughts that we've re-articulated this evening, but, you know, it's there with thoughts, and I'm sure we can probably come up with some more beltingly good ideas, you know, between us, you know, if we do the same again. And as I say, Zoom workshop wasn't too much of an imposition of time or whatever, and it was productive.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
I'm always conscious that as councillors, we only hear about things that go wrong, and our view of the world is you know, very distorted from that point of view, and I'm humble enough to recognise that. I'm sure that the complaints outweigh the compliments, but I was thinking when we were talking, we were all talking about negative experiences, and it would be useful if we've got any examples of good experiences as well that we might draw on, in terms of, you know, something to aspire to, as opposed to just, I mean, I felt particularly at the beginning, everybody was venting about the casework that they'd had, and I you know, I recognise that because I see that myself, but I also do get some compliments and so on. So I just wondered if we have any of those examples of good practice as well that we can draw upon. It just seems to me to balance it out really, because otherwise it sounds a bit, I mean, it's quite legitimate, everybody's bringing these examples of poor practice, but it does feel as though it is a bit sort of slanted, really. And that's not everybody's experiences, because in fact we'd get a lot more complaints, I think, if it was. So that's just another suggestion, if you've got any way of accessing, you know, compliments and so on as well. I guess it's usually about the individuals that get the compliments and how they've handled things. Maybe there's something about that as well. We need to, you know, we need to build into whatever our aspiring standards are. Thank you.
Yeah, just to come back on.
Sorry, Paul.
Sorry.
You go first. I've got a list.
Just come back on a couple of points. Yeah, the thing about other councils that do well, Councillor MacDonald, we are doing much more now around benchmarking with other authorities and with comparable ones as well. We've just set up a group which includes Leeds and Birmingham and Cardiff, And the headline is that they're all having difficulties. Everybody's found it difficult coming out of the pandemic period, and you know the issues that are in the paper about recruitment and turnover and all that sort of stuff are common. But there is a lot of stuff that they're doing around setting standards and stuff as well, which we can certainly learn from, and that's a sort of ongoing process. In terms of compliments, we're trying to work harder at capturing the compliments. It's always been a bit of an afterthought. You know, we've got a feedback and complaints team, but it's been very much about complaints. And we know there's feedback out there which is positive, and we need to capture that. Though I think it's really important to say, hopefully you all know, but none of us are happy with how things are at the moment. You know, so, some of the strands it's going okay, it's curate's egg, but across the authority, nobody's happy with where we are at the minute. You know, it's really hard as the head of customer services to hear people going, I've been waiting for an hour and a half for my call to be answered. You know, we all know we've got to get better, and we're all working at it. But it would just be really good to have you all on board, as you're suggesting, to help us deal with that.
Thank you. I have a list of people, but I just want to reiterate, as we did in the initial meeting when we very first met, that we feel that this is more around systems change, and what we don't want is our staff to feel as though this is about them. So, you know, we completely understand that we've got reduced resources and increased demand, and that the staff are working as hard as they can. So if we can just make sure that that message gets fed back to staff, that this is not about us looking in on them, but this is more about the systems that need to change in order to support them to be able to do their job properly. Sorry, I took the liberty then, but sorry, Councillor Hogan.
It's not about compliments, because compliments, you know, that's fine, that's in-house. But what we need to be looking at as well, if we're going to be looking at other places, we discussed this morning at an earlier meeting, is that we need to look and not fall into the traps and sort of asking what went wrong, why did it go wrong when you tried to put something in place, and so we don't fall into those traps, because that's what we also have to make sure. Is because it's looking at some of the places that have gone right, yeah, that's fine, but we also need to make sure that sometimes we're told about systems that have gone so well, but they've had 2 or 3 failures, or things have gone wrong on how they've instituted them, even though they've seemed like the best thing ever at a time. And it's nice to, because quite often we learn, you know, as said this morning from a colleague of mine said, you know, it's better to learn from the mistakes so that we don't repeat them, because that's the other thing when we're doing it. You know, obviously we've got to have a system for making sure the staff know when the compliments are coming in, but we also have to have a system that's fit for purpose, so that the compliments are quite a regular occurrence. Yeah, because you know some of the sterling work they do is amazing. It's just we've got to make sure when we're putting systems in place, we're looking at other places where it didn't quite go right, and so we don't repeat those mistakes as well. Because you know we've all been sold the thing that's the best thing since sliced bread, 100%. You know this works brilliantly, and then we know how rubbish it's been, for want of a better word, shall we say?
It's quite interesting. One of the feedbacks from the LGA peer review was about starting small and taking measured risks. And what they said, which I think we need to keep ahead of us, is don't be afraid to fail and learn. You know, especially when we're dealing with fairly small changes. And if it doesn't work out, then we learn from it and we move on. So, yeah, important to keep that in view.
Thank you. Councillor Ross.
Thank you. I was going to make much the same point as you did, because it came out in the workshop that people would pick up the phone angry after waiting 30 minutes plus. But when they were dealt with by the staff, they calmed down, and you anecdotally were saying you're complimented in the end. So exactly the same point as Dawn. It's not the staff. I mean, I'm sure some staff do get it wrong at times, but it's not generally the staff. It's the system that we need to improve. And I echo Dawn's comments about trying to make sure we're not blaming the staff for this. We've given them an impossible job, and they're doing the best to solve it. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Naz.
That was a point I was about to make regarding not blaming the staff. I think that's really important. A lot of the time the frustration is because the phone lines are not being answered, or people are waiting and then the call is dropped, so they don't even get to speak to a member of staff. I also agree with the comments that Councillor MacDonald made about capturing the good stories as well, the positive experiences, because sometimes we do get emails from people when things have gone right. So it's good to capture that as well, rather than just looking at the negatives. I also think the evidence gathering workshop that we were involved in last week was really positive, was really good. And, you know, I think we need to do more of them, just so that we can have a lot more input in regards to gathering evidence and having that one-to-one information sharing experience of any other committee members do want to get involved in things like that. It's really important that we are able to continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. One of the things that's just, it occurs to me, when you use those that have been in the council for a while will remember we had Charter Mark some time ago. One of the really positive things about that is that drives people to look for those positive experiences, because in order to meet that standard, you have to be able to evidence it. And actually that encourages us just not to take that comment, but to record it, pass it on to the member of staff. In my previous role as a head of service, nothing made me happier than seeing that. Just thought you'd like to see this. It was, you know, somebody saying thank you, you know, and they can be really small things, but they can have a huge impact when people do really difficult jobs. So thank you, that's a welcome comment.
Thank you. Councillor Lodge.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As someone who works in a contact centre and deals with complaints, and with a bit of bad weather and storms, trains are stopped all over, so, you know, I know what it's like. I think you're right. It's when you're looking at things, you're making changes, but it's recognising if it doesn't work, don't be afraid to, because I know we've done things and we've made some changes and then rolled them back a little bit because that's not quite worked and gone back another way. You know, and it's just something, it dawned on me actually looking at things in there that, do you have a chat function that people go? Because we introduced that 18 months or so ago, and that has really filtered out quite a lot of the calls, because agents can deal with 3 or 5 chats at the same time, and people are coming through then, it's filtering out the calls from people, and people generally do want to. And then LinkedIn, as I'm sure it's mainly for you'll know, but for other colleagues, you have like the self-service knowledge base that pulls the information out in the background, and they give the answers to people, so people can go through there, and before they actually get to an agent, they can sort of answer or get the answers to self-select, can't they? So I just wonder whether we've looked at that as a means to try and do it as well. But you know, the other thing I would say is, yeah, when staff, people do get through to them on the phone, and people do unload. But it's down to how the staff then quickly turn it around. It's celebrating that success. And I think it would probably be helpful to everybody in here, in the committee, and maybe to the wider councillors, all of us, just to give some indication of volumes that come in, volumes of calls, the average time, that sort of information. Because we will rely, as people have said, we rely on what our constituents come to us and say, I was waiting for an hour. You know from looking at the stats, they've not been waiting for an hour. But you can't convince us that, because that's what people are telling us. But when you've got that information there, it sometimes helps to have an understanding of what's coming through.
Thank you. At the risk of sounding like Jam Tomorrow Man, we are on the verge of doing much more around a number of areas. One is the whole web chat thing, where people don't necessarily even need to speak to an agent. We have a knowledge base, and they can do it off that. Also then having the point where people can jump off. If they reach a point where they can't do it through the bot, they can then move across and speak and you know, have a conversation with a real person. I mean, we have thought about having a full sort of web chat facility whereby people have got a different option, and they can come through. And you're right, you get skilled agents who can deal with, you know, 4 or 5 calls consecutively. It's one of those areas where I'm not absolutely convinced it's going to save us any money. If you know, this idea of, oh well, we won't need this many agents if we do that. that may not necessarily be the case, but it does give us another route. And if people are saying that's how they'd like to do things, then we need to think about making that real.
If I may, Chair, just on that, I know from my own experience with my colleagues, we went, you're joking, how are we going to manage this and go through? But it has improved things, and it is, and there are agents who prefer to do that. And you see them sort of jumping, they're looking at things, and you look, they're taking on 5 or 6 chats at the same time, and dealing with things, and generally getting good responses. You know, the CSAT surveys, customer satisfaction surveys, the response that come back, you generally, it is generalising, we're generally finding a better sort of satisfaction rating for those sort of things than people that come in through the phone.
I think one of the things the point about continuous improvement, which is something I'm quite passionate about, if we move towards using those kinds of technologies, we need to kind of start in a safe space. So start in something that's quite straightforward, quite transactional, and grow that up. And I'm quite a chatty person, quite a gregarious person. I like being around people. But when it comes to me managing my own personal business, I'd really rather not talk to anyone. So if I could just do it through a chat, and we know that a lot of our customers feel like that, which allows our skilled call handlers to be available for those that do want to talk to somebody or whose inquiry is more complicated, so it needs that human contact. So it's entirely win-win to get that right, but starting small and growing it, because I think we've probably all also experienced a really bad automated service that just drives you crazy, and we want to learn from others who have perhaps made mistakes that we would want to avoid. So
Thank you. So on that note, I think if I can just read through my notes about where we're going to go from here, then I think we were all in agreement. Please shout out if you don't think this is right. Oh, sorry, Councillor Rivers, I've written you down as well. Go on.
Sorry. Actually, just first of all, it's really great that we're trying to put together both qualitative and quantitative of seeing from the inside in this committee. When I was first elected, I requested that I go and see the call centre because I wanted to. Yes, I contacted you. I remember before. I just wanted to see how the staff feel when calls come in, and also where the conflict cohesion, where do we stand, how do we understand people behind the calls, because I know a lot of the calls that we're getting from our constituents will probably be frustration, and the only person people that they would be talking to or really taking it out of all the waiting and that, or disrepair, would be those who are in the building. And it was really quite rewarding, and seeing that from that perspective supported me to understand the call waiting and frustration of the customers. I think we also need to think about the fact that we all get different kind of intersections of cases where some of them are frustrated about the call they waited for or the services they waited for. My question was, and it's something probably said before I turned up, is there must have been how do you deal with the backlog of the COVID, which also obviously brought a lot of issues of people waiting, because we get it, we get those kind of calls, and then without making excuses, we say, well, there's been a delay because of COVID, and how do we support you in actually clearing some of these issues?
Yes, to take your first point first, as soon as you started to speak, Councillor, I reminded myself that was something I wanted to say to everybody, really, is that as hopefully things start to ease, people are very welcome to come and listen in the contact centre. It was something that routinely we used to do. When you started, it was something when we did that all the time, and we do it also with tenants reps as well. And it really does open people's eyes, and everybody, generally goes away full of admiration for the work that everybody's doing. But it will give you a feel for what people are saying, how people are feeling, how cross people are when they first come on if they've been queuing. So yeah, that's certainly very welcome. The COVID thing, I mean, it's been quite a blurred line, really. I mean, obviously in terms of the contact centre, we did that fantastic job where the team was set up to do the COVID helpline, and that then eventually moved across to track and trace. But there was a lot of fallout from the COVID period. So, for example, you know, the reason we were suddenly deluged with repairs was because people could only order emergency repairs until March of last year. Also with reminder letters and stuff like that. So, you know, people hadn't been chased for rent arrears, they hadn't been chased for council tax arrears. Suddenly, somebody dropped a flag and said, right, that can start again. And that's carried on. There's been a sort of ripple effect from that, really. So yeah, there certainly has been an effect, which is beginning to die down now, but I'd say it's still lurking around the edges.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Councillor Rivers. Yeah, so our next steps then, if I can just kind of pull this back together now, is that we all agree that we want a set of overarching principles about how we treat our customers to begin with, and then looking at the targeted work in key areas of concerns with the highest level of issues. We've agreed today for some members to work with Elise and Paul prior to our next meeting, and at that point I think I'd like to see some sort of report pulled together to be presented at the next meeting, and I'd like to understand the how, the when, the who. So how are we going to do it, when are we going to do it, and who's going to do it? And I think that would make it kind of clear for us as members that we've actually managed to achieve something as a committee, so that we can understand the direction that we're going now. Does everybody agree with that? Does anybody disagree? No? Okay. Well, thank you for your time this afternoon. Have you got any questions of us before you leave?
No, just to say thank you for that. I think it is very achievable between now and the next meeting to give you that sort of longer term picture, but with that immediate sort of what's on fire in front of our face now, but actually what are we going to be, what's the prevention we do moving forward. So, and thank you for volunteering to work with us on it.
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
Thank you. Just for a bit of admin then, the next meeting's on the 10th of March. I think we probably need to set up a session. If Alice, would you be able to do that with Elise and Paul and members? Thank you very much. So we move on to the next item of our agenda, which is draft work plan. Alice.
I think the last item has slightly answered one of my questions in the work plan, Chair, and that is that this committee does want to carry on doing a bit more work towards a kind of final report of recommendations, if you like, for want of some term. And I think your idea of the how, when, who. So that was what I wanted to check in, really, that you wanted to keep going with this, so that on the 10th of March there is something where you feel like you know what you've done as a committee and how that's going to feed into what's happening in this kind of ongoing work stream, if you like, of customer experience standards, particularly about standards and expectations. So for me, it's been a short-lived year of but trying to do something really important, and I actually think this could be really helpful, and it was something that was asked of you by the cooperative executive member, and that's part of this relationship with transitional committees in this space.
Does anyone have any more suggestions or comments on the work programme? No? Well, that's the end of our meeting then, and thank you all for attending today. Thank you.